Chapter 1. The Good News. I like good news, despite all evidence to the contrary. It's uplifting for me when the underdog wins, when the faceless corporation doesn't get the big merger, when the ex doesn't get absolutely everything in the divorce. I like good news because it's rare. In this day and age, it's becoming more so. Now, I don't kid myself. I know fairness is not among the fundamental laws of the universe. That's why I don't bitch and moan anymore. I take it all in stride. My past, my situation, and that's why I took my future into my own hands as well. Because honestly, if you want things fixed, just fucking fix them. Today is important to you? He asked. Just as important as any other day. But it's not just any other day, is it? He asked. I suppose not. How long has it been? 7 years. 7 years is a long time, he muses. Not to a pyramid. You are not a pyramid, Seth, he is plaintive. And you know I hate it when you needlessly interject my name. You don't have to bridge a gap here, asshole. You're still not trying to cross a divide. You know me, I know you. You don't have to name drop me to make me feel comfortable. This isn't a hostage negotiation. He smiles, but is non-committal, like so much of the rest of him. And here's where he says, whatever you say. It's been 7 years, and I must have heard him say that thousands of times. Every time I expect him to end it with, whatever you say, Seth. He never has. Not once. But I see it in his eyes every time he wants to. Prick. Yeah, 7 years, long time, big old pat on the back for me. Well, your sarcasm betrays a wounded pride. You need to keep check on that ego. Need I remind you of what you're like when you don't restrain yourself? Even in a congratulatory tone, the therapist is disparaging. I know it's for my own good, but, like, really, dude? He changes the subject. I assume business is good. Don't assume, I state flatly. That makes an ass out of you. And me, right? He asks. Yes, you, I finish. You know, he rolls his eyes, your cleverness is always impressive. To you, at least. And he finishes with a yawn. The numbers you've provided me are in the high thousands, projected to double within the next 5 years. He rubs his glasses clean. How does that make you feel? Fine. The therapist leans forward. Just fine? From whence you came, I would expect some more ego and self-love than that. We've played this game before. He's trying to make me care about money. He's trying to ascertain if I already care about money. He's trying to unbalance me. He always fucking does this. It's an ego test. It's a test to see if I'm still in control. I look at him. I have destroyed my life twice. I have graduated from college twice. I have been in love and failed that love twice. I have died twice. As always, he is unreadable, aside from being so obviously unimpressed. And your point? My point is that somewhere along the way, I learned some basic addition. Math is not that hard. The therapist nods. Yes, well, in this instance, the numbers are on your side. I'm fulfilling my part of our arrangement. I make sure you stay in check. I keep an eye on you because you can't keep an eye on yourself. This, he briefly and ever so non-committedly looks down at my file. Venture of yours. I'm the one that has the final say as to whether it's of value or harm to you. Now I lean forward, and for a moment, just the briefest moment, he seems surprised by this. Right, I utter. He knows I want to get to the point. Just get to the damn point already. He leans back. It is, ethically, a gray area, period. I know you're disappointed by that fact, but there it is. Legally, well, he sighs. Clearly, it is legal. You are in no wrong. I must stress here that my function in this capacity is simply to make sure you do not repeat self-destructive patterns of behavior. Now, how you arrived at this apparent wealth and affluence is clearly something that has always troubled me. I look out the window. We have been over this, and over, and over. But yet I see the clouds out over the endless ocean. I see the tide coming in on the beach. I can almost smell the salt air of the sea outside as the weather is changing. A storm is coming in, the promise of petrichor. I feel the permanence of my furniture. I smell the dark roast I have brewed for our little weekly meeting. I see the most amazing piece of art I've ever laid eyes on, as it rests perfectly on my wall in my living room. I remember that I had purchased it at great cost, both financially and emotionally. Shake it off. She's gone. Focus on now. You always have to break my balls. Indeed, the therapist flatly intones. And need I remind you why? Need I remind you of your condition? I sigh. I may as well have said yes. I may as well have hit my knuckles with a hammer. He continues neither ruefully nor apologetically. The therapist states the facts in black and white. You are, by all accounts, a high-functioning sociopath. You have ego problems. Your ego refuses your state of existence, yet your ego craves more. More attention, more materialism, more meaning. You are by nature never satisfied with anything. You are physically predominated by a genetic addictive disorder. This disrupts your normal brain chemistry. You use people. You have no line that you can surreptitiously and clearly delineate between love and hate. You overinflate your value to both individuals and society as a whole. You feel you are owed something, an explanation, an emotion, time. Yet, truly, you are owed nothing by anyone. That's what you have had difficulty grasping these last 7 years. Now, you have done well and made many great strides. You have helped many. You have made recompense to many. By all accounts, you have paid your debt to society. I am here as witness that, yes, you are getting better. That actually wasn't as bad as I expected. No, wait. My function here, Seth, is not to berate you. Yet I'm also here not to congratulate you either. You have very basic fundamental chemical problems, psychiatric and psychological issues. You have tried to kill yourself a few times. I start to interrupt. The therapist holds up a hand. And have been successful. But Seth, stop doing that. But he takes a deep breath, folds his hands, composing himself. You made people watch. You tried to kill yourself. On 2 occasions, you were successful. And you made your friends, your family, and someone that you loved very much watch. You made them bear witness to your self-destruction. You've made employers, co-workers, and casual acquaintances scratch their collective heads and ask, what the fuck? Why, Seth? I blink. He answers for me. You have problems. You will always have problems. In the past 7 years, since you've been sober and been in therapy, you have made amazing strides. No one will ever argue that you have tried, that you are trying, and that you may very well try until the day you die. But understand, you do not see the world the way everyone else does. Your brain is not like everyone else's. Things that should be trivial for you are sometimes monumental, for no reason. Thus, the things that should be important for you, not so much. Granted, you have told me, time and again, that you have no desire to drink, no desire to harm others, no desire to harm yourself. Unfortunately, Seth, the therapist looks me dead in the eye. I don't bother protesting the ambiguous use of my name. I don't have the luxury of trusting you. No one does. You are not capable of being able to differentiate your own emotional state. I'm not thrilled at this. What the hell does that mean? The therapist mirrors my impatient outburst. It means that you do not know when you're lying. Take a deep breath, he continues. No one can view reality strictly as it is. There are always shades of gray, attitudes, prejudices, and some level of genetic predetermination. All people deal with that. Unfortunately for you, there is more to deal with. You started with minor depression, which, fueled through isolation, narcissistic displacement disorder, and alcohol addiction, eventually became full bipolar disorder, marked by anxiety, and in your efforts to medicate, became a self-destructive aggression disorder. But your ego won't let you go down alone. No. You decide you have the right to literally drag all of your friends and family and loved ones down with you, to the point where you actually died. And there it was. He sees me slump. He knows the truth hurts. But through truth, I have gained some semblance of a foothold. The truth gave me a glimpse into a life that could be better. If not for me, at least I didn't have to hurt anyone else. Not anymore. The truth, as it were, set me free. You were terrified, alone, hallucinating, homeless. You hadn't slept in a week, penniless, starving. What was it that stopped you from going back to old habits? At that moment, Seth, what was it that kept you from drinking, drugging, and ultimately, successfully killing yourself? Her. The therapist nods. Yes, the mysterious her. The one person, the one feeling that gave you pause. I take a sip of the Java. My own blend. It sells well. Well, because it comes prepackaged with Seth. He snaps his fingers. At first, he's stern. But my therapist softens a bit. I see him thinking. I see him comparing me to the me that used to be. The me he knew before. The me with little control. Inside, I see him almost throw up his hands, as if there is one last thing I'm supposed to figure out. I just haven't yet. That's okay. I'm not afraid. I'm never afraid. I'll figure it out eventually. Your tests have proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that you are a genius. Most people presume that's a good thing. Not for you. It means you have the capacity to manipulate, to aggrandize, and that you have in the past lied, cheated, betrayed, and sacrificed to get what you want. Worst of all, it means that you can lie to yourself, pretend what you're doing is warranted, necessary, perhaps even owed to you. You can make yourself entitled to whom or whatever you want. That's why we have tried this. Self-imposed corrective morals. I parrot. Yes. Over the past 7 years, deciding and forcing yourself to do the right things by others, regardless of what you want, regardless of what your defective brain is telling you. Learning to ignore your very, very temporary desires for comfort and illusory happiness in favor of others. Putting the comfort and happiness of those very, very few that you genuinely love ahead of your own. Am I not doing this? I demand. The therapist surprises me in this instance. He lights a cigarette. Son of a bitch. In 7 years, I never even knew he smoked. I don't like it. And I don't want the smell in my house. I just got this place. You are, Seth. But I just want to be clear on this. You are fundamentally broken. Things are treatable, sure. But this particular therapy is a radical development. This is the first instance in which it has ever been tried. You are your own sentry, and I'm the one watching over you. Honestly, I'm impressed. I am. By and far, looking at your medical history, you're a lost cause. Mental ward, suicide attempt, theft, larceny, grand larceny, jail time, suicide attempt, assault, aggravated assault, assault against a police officer, suicide attempt, mental ward, homelessness, prevalent, and, of course, you've been dead. Right. I listen to the charges and I acknowledge I'm not troubled by the past anymore because I am trying with all my power not to be that person anymore. In the pre-civilized times, you would have been a goner long ago, like someone born without limbs, tossed away to die because you are broken. The way we work now, people, we're better. We care now, or at least we try to. The difference, Seth, is that whether you consider me harsh or not, I serve a function. Your limitations, your disabilities, while they may not be your fault and while they may be unfair, they are still ultimately your responsibility. You are fundamentally not a good person. You were not built that way. But while it is said that a leopard cannot change its spots, I finished the tired old metaphor. Does a leopard also have spots on its eyes? Right. You may not be able to change some things, but you can change the way you perceive them. You came very close to a psychotic break. I'm here to ensure that doesn't happen. Unfortunately for you, the situation was either a breakthrough or a breakdown. Well, I'm happy I went the right way. He shakes his head no. You went the right way for others. There is no right way for you. You, as you knew you, does not exist. Not anymore. Your penance for continued existence is ironically not to live for you, but for others. He oddly seems satisfied at this. Well, then, Doc, are we done for now? He nods. jots a few notes. Good. Put out the fucking smoke, for God's sake. This is California. I just bought this house. He relents and he stands, straightens his tie. Seth, never forget, it's my job to be your guide. You're here by the virtue of the fact that you gave up material considerations long ago. Money means nothing. Life is a zero-sum game. People, how you treat them now, as well as putting others before yourself, is the only way you can continue to exist. And as far as the new house goes, he looks around stiffly and unimpressed. Your place in Colorado has a better view. Forget the temporary illusion of wealth. It's fleeting. He grins. My car costs more than both of your houses, and your education combined. Silently, we wade through the garden foyer to the guest entrance and through the back patio. We're a short jump from the sand beneath our feet. Thunder is in the distance. Electricity is in the air. The ocean is roiling. It's one of the most soothing and beautiful sounds any human can ever hear. He opens the door to his vintage Jaguar as the first drop hits his shoulder. More thunder. As an afterthought, the therapist sighs and looks at me. I think you're going to be okay, Seth. Congratulations on the new place. Congratulations on 7 years. Make sure you never hurt anyone again, and I'll continue to say congratulations on the good news. I smile. I like good news. Chapter 2. The Bad News. The alleyway was dark. It was freezing, and it was slick out in places. It had been raining all week. Smelled of rain, stale beer, and old coffee. There were 3 of them behind Seth. 3 large guys. Seth could see his breath in the streetlight. It was wet and cold as he made his way toward the exit. He knew he wouldn't get past the trash cans. He acted like he couldn't hear them. Yet, there was a dragging, stomping sound. A flat, wet slapping. The large, rotund man stepped in front of Seth from around the corner, smiling. His mustache hugged his grin. Wet out. Thought we'd find you here. He folded up his umbrella. Wet out, Seth uttered. He glanced at the fat, mustached man's shoes as he slowly stretched his neck from beneath his trench coat. It was slick with leftover rain. Seth let his hands drop to his sides. He gripped something in both. And dark. There was lightning then. Then there was the bad news. No, Seth. The therapist stopped twirling his pen around his fingers, effortlessly. You said you were going to tell me about coffee. You said coffee was important. Ha! Seth shouted more than laughed. You got it. Coffee. Oh, right. This is like the 3rd or 4th time I've met with him. He hasn't heard about the bad news. Not yet. I said first I had to tell him about coffee. The New York Stock Exchange started as a coffee shop on Wall Street. Seth yawned. It opened in 1807. It was a place for... He rubbed his eyes and recalled the information. Underwriters, brokers, merchants, traders, and politicians, selling, purchasing, trafficking, or insuring, some reading, others eagerly inquiring the news. He shrugged. At the time, it was the New York Stock Exchange. The original Tontine coffee shop was there on the corner of Wall and Water, until it burned down in 1835. They dropped the "and" in 1863. Went with the elegant New York Stock Exchange. The therapist nodded absently. And this is the information provided by your various employers, or something you came across independently? New Yorkers drink 7 times more coffee on average than any major city, Seth replied. The therapist pointed his pen at Seth, lightly smiling. Oh, I get it, it's a shtick. New York is the city that never sleeps, and they have every major brand, every major franchise. There are literally coffee shops everywhere in New York. Why do you think that is? The therapist asked. Just population, I would hazard that guess, Seth answered. Seth sat up from the recliner. The therapist had a quite contemporary office, more of a studio feel, open. It was also sleek and colorful and lent itself to the air of soft lines. There were no constraining devices of any kind here. No clocks or square, flat screens, or any four-sided pictures. No hard angular shapes. Even the desk was oval. Seth finished his cappuccino and set it down. Continued. A lot of people don't know that most of the coffee they will ever drink is Arabica. Something like 75% of all coffee in the world that people drink is Arabica. But in Indonesia and Africa, I think, there's another kind named Robusta. It has twice as much caffeine. The therapist looked at Seth patiently. And what's your punchline here? Replace all the coffee in New York with Robusta. Either the stock market will fix itself or witness a 50% increase in homicide rates. The therapist nodded, smiled. Coffee has other uses as well. He flipped through some notes. Seth, you seem to have devised a rather singular method for bringing in, how shall we say, other perks with the coffee besides the caffeine itself. The smell of coffee, right? Seth tilted his head wistfully. Actually, Nescafe, Starbucks, Dunkin' Donuts, these places have been known to inject smells into containers to make the scent really fresh when you open it up. You're getting off point. No, I'm not. Aromacology. You were talking about bringing in the profit, how I did it. Seth popped his knuckles and laid back on the recliner once more. All things are porous. Regardless of how impressive some units are, canines don't smell through material. What happens is that all the odors permeate through pores in material, creating a scent cone. Aromacology. The therapist began spinning his pen round his fingers. He didn't have to prompt this particular patient to continue. What would be ideal is to have whatever you want to move inside something with a slow permeation rate. Glass, maybe. But I didn't have that luxury. Anyway, wait too long, the outside of the container is contaminated. Simply move whatever you want to move quickly before the scent cone develops on the packaging. Coffee has a strong scent. I'm following you. The therapist sipped his own, now cold, espresso. Canines can smell just like we can see. You can't ever fool the damn dog. Just fool the damn cop. Vacuum seal whatever you need after it's compressed. Put that in a Ziploc bag. Put that in another bag and vacuum seal that. Do that a few times to buy you a bit of time. Place it inside a 1 or 5 pound container. Cover that with fresh ground coffee. The sweeter, more caramel or vanilla scent, the better. Seal that package on site in the coffee house if you can. If you're good like me, it's easy enough. All in all, the coffee ground should cover everything evenly. You weigh it out and even up the sides and walk out with something that looks exactly like a vacuum-packed sealed container of fresh coffee grounds. Not ingenious, but it is an effective enough idea, the therapist conceded. Most times you wouldn't even need to do that. Just make it look convincingly like a pound of coffee. You're okay. Pushing ahead, the therapist addressed what was foremost on his mind. My concern in that situation would naturally be that I would be caught. And it is, presently, still my concern that you were caught. Right, officer. You don't have to share his real name, of course. We'll call him Officer Stadenko. Chubby old Stadenko. See, here's the thing about cops. Stop generalizing people. Right. The thing about this cop, this one particular cop, I just couldn't stand the entitlement. And his mustache, oddly enough. Maybe I just hate mustaches. Something we need to address, Seth? Huh? No. He thought he had it all figured out. Owned his little burg. Ran his little group of bike cops. Had security locked down for all the rich folk. Thought he had me figured out fairly early on, too. How long did you know this policeman? Doesn't matter. A year or so, I guess. For a year, you repackaged illegal materials under the nose you thought of the law. The therapist folded his hands. The pause was weighty. The therapist leaned forward, intently attempting to memorize whatever Seth was about to say. Things were different then, Seth sighed. The therapist leaned away, began spinning his pen as Seth talked. I did what I felt was necessary at the time to secure myself a future. Away from where I was. Away from what I'd done. Away from myself. Away from your past, the therapist finished. Seth placed his hands behind his head. Supposedly, there's a cup of Starbucks coffee in every scene in the movie Fight Club. The therapist stopped spinning his pen and jotted down a note. Taking a long breath, he glanced at Seth briefly. You have yet to go over the finer points of the confrontation. Then he started writing rather quickly. Seth nodded. The bad news. The night I left, it ended up storming, just torrentially, awfully, after I was long gone, and it was cold. And someone was in the alley way behind the coffee shop. Someone was in the alley? The therapist asked. Someone was hurt. Well, Seth's eyes narrowed as he shifted his focus out the window. There was more than one. There were a few. All hurt. All hurt pretty badly, as it were. It was bad news. Lightning struck again, close this time. Seth remembered stepping over the paralyzed, barely breathing form in front of him. Water was dripping in the poor man's face. Hair disheveled, mustache disheveled. The other three were all the same. All laying on the damp, filthy ground. All unable to move. All gasping very shallowly. Cold and wet and alone and in pain. The piercing, crackling sounds coming from Seth's hands stopped. He immediately placed them in his pockets and continued on his way as it started to rain yet again. There was thunder as he strode alone down the slicked, empty street in the middle of the night. So tell me the bad news, the therapist said. We have a bit of time left. How bad was it for you that night? Seth peered over at the therapist, somewhat perplexed. For me? Oh, no, I said it was bad news, but I never said it was bad news for me. Chapter 3. Coffee Facts. According to many historians, coffee was discovered by a herd of goats. An Ethiopian herder discovered a bean making his goats crazy in 9th century, which was later termed as coffee beans. Coffee beans are actually extracted from a special berry species. Coffee beans have become popular as a standalone commodity. Otherwise, it may have been sold as coffee berry in the supermarkets. Coffee is the second most sold commodity around the world. Coffee stands second, as oil or fuel secured the first place in the list of most sold commodities around the globe. New York inhabitants consume 7 times more coffee than people from any other U.S. city. New York seems to have all major coffee brands and franchises. Coffee can kill you if the amount exceeds the safety limit. The lethal dose of coffee for an adult is 100 cups of processed coffee drink, so be careful about your daily intake. There are about 50 different species of coffee. In different parts of the world, these coffee beans are grown naturally. Only the state of Hawaii produces coffee commercially in the U.S. This is definitely the most consumed drink. Approximately 500 billion cups of coffee have been consumed, which far exceeds the current global population of 7.19 billion people. Recently, scientists are researching on other uses of coffee beans. Some researchers revealed that coffee beans may replace fossil fuel and work in motor engines in next centuries. If you're willing to consume more caffeine, you should buy the light roasted coffee beans. Dark roasted coffee beans contain less caffeine than the lighter beans. Africa, Brazil, and Colombia produce more than 40% of coffee in the world. Hawaii is the only U.S. state that produces coffee commercially. Once, a coffee lover made a world record of consuming coffee. He drank 82 cups of coffee in 7 consecutive hours. Wow. During World War II, the soldiers used to compete against each other to secure the top coffee consumer's position. U.S. Marines reported that the record was 20 cups a day. George C. Washington, an English chemist, invented instant coffee in Guatemala in 1906. The product was commercially launched in 1909. Kopi Luwak is excreted by a Sumatran species of wild cats. This refers to the most expensive coffee in the whole world. You'll have to pay $100 to buy 4 ounces of coffee. In the 16th century, Muslim rulers banned coffee due to its nervous effects. Coffee has been banned 3 times in 3 regions after it became a popular drink around the globe. Boston's Dorothy Jones was the first licensed coffee brewer in the USA. She was granted a license in 1670 and then started selling brewed coffee. In Turkey and Greece, coffee is part of their ancient culture. Still, they welcome their guests with coffee as a welcome drink. Now, about 65% of Americans drink coffee with breakfast. Even bad coffee is better than no coffee at all. David Lynch. That wonderful scent in your corner coffee store may actually be fake. Coffee companies such as Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts sometimes use fake coffee smell to entice shoppers. Scentair, a so-called scent provider, is a popular choice in the coffee industry, as well as retail stores, restaurants, and hotels, where methods of aromacology are used, along with the latest in fragrance technology. Store-bought coffee like Nescafe also injects coffee aroma into the container to seem fresher when first opening. That said, a person claiming to be a former coffee production engineer explained on Reddit that the fake smell injected into containers is originally created from particles of real coffee beans, so the scent is at least fairly authentic. Europeans originally called coffee Arabian wine. Due to the linguist history of what eventually became coffee, Europeans referred to the drink as Arabian wine. The word coffee originally came from the Arabic, kahwat al-bun, or wine of the bean. That phrase turned into kahwa, which became kaveh in Turkey, and eventually became kofi in Dutch and cafe in Italy. Coffee was also so influential in Turkey that their word breakfast, kahvaltı, translates to before coffee. And their word for brown, kahverengi, is also derived from kahve, for coffee. A cup of Starbucks exists in every scene of Fight Club. David Fincher, the director of Fight Club, is said to have inserted a Starbucks coffee cup into every scene. Apparently, Starbucks was all right with the usage of their brand and only stopped Fincher from using their name in a shot where a coffee shop is destroyed by a giant rolling ball. Café Sospeso may just restore your faith in humanity. Café Sospeso, which in Italian means suspended or pended coffee, is a tradition that involves paying for an extra cup of coffee for a future customer who may be down on their luck. People who can't afford a cup of coffee can come into a shop that observes this practice and ask if there are any Sospesos available free of charge. The tradition is said to have originated in Naples around a century ago, but the practice has grown over the years to be recognized internationally. In 2013, an anonymous customer paid for 500 cups of coffee at a Tim Hortons in Edmonton, Canada, which snowballed into patrons donating 10,000 cups of coffee at over 30 locations. The 2 oldest recorded cats drink coffee every day. The Guinness recognized oldest cat ever was Cream Puff, who lived to be 38 years old and died in 2005. The owner, Jake Perry, fed her coffee every morning, along with bacon, eggs, and broccoli. This is especially significant because Perry was also the owner of the previous record holder, Grandpa Rex Allen, who was fed the same diet and died at 34. You can swim in coffee at a spa in Japan. The Yunsan Spa Resort in Hakone, Japan has specialty spas that allow customers to bathe in variously delightful sticky liquids such as wine, chocolate, green tea, sake, and coffee. For an admission price of just 2,800 yen, about $27, bathers can have coffee poured on them and then stroll over to the newly opened ramen bath to swim among the noodles. According to legend, it only took 1 sip of coffee to convince a pope that the drink was most definitely not the devil's work. The veracity of this legend is a bit hazy, as it's not even clear whether Pope Clement VII or Pope Clement VIII was supposed to have said it. Here's travel writer and university professor Francis Hayes' account of the myth. in her New York Times best-selling book, A Year in the World. Some fanatics consider coffee the drink of the devil and ask the Pope to ban it. After one sip, the Pope is said to have exclaimed, "This drink is so delicious that it would be a sin to let only misbelievers drink it. Let's defeat Satan by blessing the drink, which contains nothing objectionable to a Christian." The account doesn't even include a specific pope, and nobody seems to have a definitive take on this story, so it's fair to be skeptical. But it'd be a sin not to share. The saucer could have originally been used for slurping after cooling. This claim is also a bit tricky to pin down, but apparently around the 18th century, people used to drink coffee out of the saucer we mostly now consider a simple coaster for the cup and spoon. At the time, the saucers were much deeper, and the larger surface area allowed the coffee to cool much more quickly. A popular story tells of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson discussing the value of the Senate when this exchange happens. "Why," said Washington, "did you just now pour that coffee into your saucer before drinking it?" "To cool it," said Jefferson. "My throat is not made of brass." The interaction has not been proven, but for what it's worth, using the saucer to help cool down your coffee certainly does work. A George Washington invented instant coffee. Although the first instant coffee recipe involving water was invented in 1901 by a Chicago chemist named Satoru Kato. The man who invented the first mass-produced instant coffee was in fact named George Washington. His first brand was called Red E Coffee, and despite being considered not very well, the instant coffee was given to appreciative American soldiers during World War I. Starbucks is themed after Moby Dick. Originally, the company was supposed to be Pecchio's, after the name of Captain Ahab's boat in Herman Melville's Moby Dick. But after hearing the tagline, "Have a cup of Pecchiod," said out loud to them, the founders decided to instead name the business after Ahab's first mate, Starbuck, who warned Ahab to stop chasing the white whale. The nautical theme that extends to the mermaid logo comes from their desire to keep up with the seafaring history of coffee. The original New York Stock Exchange was a coffee house on Wall Street. The New York Stock Exchange began in the Tontine Coffee House, a real coffee shop opened in 1794 and located on the corner of Wall and Water Street before a fire burned it down in 1835. Named after Neapolitan banker Lorenzo di Tonti. The shop was a meeting place for underwriters, brokers, merchants, traders, and politicians, selling, purchasing, trafficking, or insuring. Some reading, others eagerly inquiring the news, according to an article from 1807. The Tontine Coffee House was the center of trading until 1817, when operations were moved to a building on 40 Wall Street. At the time, the organization was called the New York Stock and Exchange, and later dropped the "and" in 1863, as the volume of stock trading increased and the building became less focused on the other types of exchanges from before. According to many calculations, the northernmost landmass on Earth is called Coffee Club Island. Coffee Club Island, or Kaffeklubben Island, is a small island located just above Greenland that stands as the northernmost part of significant land on Earth. Explorer Robert Peary was the first to discover the landmass in 1900, but it wasn't named until 1921, when Danish explorer Lauge Koch was creating a map of the region. Supposedly, the naming choice was to honor an informal coffee club of geographers that met regularly at the University of Copenhagen. Although the island barely supports vegetation, the purple saxifrage flower has survived the conditions and is the northernmost flower in the world. Coca-Cola makes a canned coffee called Georgia. Coca-Cola owns a line of canned coffees called Georgia. That's available in Japan, Singapore, South Korea, India, and Bahrain. Although the cans are hard to find in the United States and only one flavor is currently available on Amazon, the Georgia coffee brand can be found in a few restaurants if you feel the need to try it. You've probably heard incorrect stories about the origin of the terms cup of joe and Americano. Despite the pervasive story that Americano got its name from American soldiers diluting espresso shots during World War II, the term didn't show up until the 1970s. Unfortunately, nobody seems to have a definitive take on how Americano actually came about. In another false etymology, there's a story that cup of joe also comes from coffee-drinking American G.I. Joes, but this is just a myth as well. Although, just as with Americano, the true origin has never been proved. Fact-checking site Snopes believes the phrase most likely came from the old coffee slang, jamoke. The slang phrase, cup of jamoke, became corrupted into a cup of joe. Snopes sides with the jamoke theory, due to this finding from the linguist Michael Quinion. It is significant that an early example appears in 1931 in the Reserve Officer's Manual by a man named Erdman. Jamoke, Java, Joe, coffee, derived from the words Java and mocha, where originally the best coffee came from. Drinking coffee may help save your liver from alcohol. Coffee has been found to decrease the risk of alcohol-related liver disease cirrhosis, which can cause cancer and liver failure. One study found that each cup of coffee they drank per day, participants were 22% less likely to develop alcohol cirrhosis. Although not directly linked to alcohol recovery, a more recent study from Italy concluded that drinking coffee can reduce the chances of liver cancer by 40%. While drinking 3 or more cups a day could reduce the risk by 50%. Better drink up. Coffee is actually a fruit. That's right. Coffee beans are actually the pits of berries. The coffee berries, sometimes called coffee cherries, are an edible fruit that have coffee beans inside. They're only called beans because of their resemblance to beans. Did you know you were actually drinking fruit when you were throwing back those lattes? It explains why the Brazilian acai berry shares so many properties with the coffee bean. Hawaii is the only U.S. state that commercially grows coffee. Coffee tends to grow better at equatorial climates, so you really can't grow coffee in the contiguous United States. Hawaii, however, has an optimal climate for harvesting Java beans. Hawaii is known for their Kona coffee, which is widely exported and popular around the world. As if people in Hawaii didn't have it good enough. They have some of the world's most beautiful beaches and some of the world's best coffee. It used to be a custom in Turkey that if a husband did not provide his wife with coffee, it was grounds for divorce. Until death or lack of quality beans do you part. This is an odd requirement, no doubt, but it sort of makes sense. And we bet the required coffee drinking makes for a much happier marriage anyway. Thankfully, this custom isn't practiced anymore today. Now we live in a world of equality where husbands and wives alike should do the right thing and make coffee for their spouse. Ever made a single cup of coffee for yourself while your significant other was home? Then you've probably also suffered the consequences. Despite what most people think, an espresso has 1/3 the caffeine of a cup of coffee due to serving sizes. Consider throwing a double or triple shot into your favorite beverage, because just one might not cut it for the more hardcore caffeine addicts. Or you could make a red eye, a shot of espresso inside a cup of coffee, or as we like to call it, beanception. Some people actually prefer drinking espresso to drip coffee or French press for that very reason. You can actually control your own caffeine consumption. So if you're reaching for that late night cup of coffee, try an Americana with 1 shot instead of a whole cup of coffee. You'll sleep much sounder. Brazil is the world's largest producer of coffee by a wide margin, followed by Vietnam and Colombia. In fact, in 2011, Brazil produced nearly twice as much as Vietnam and Colombia combined, and 1/3 of all coffee produced in the entire world. This statistic has remained fairly constant for the last 150 years. Brazil is also one of the only countries on Earth that grows both Arabica and Robusta beans. It should come as no surprise that Brazil is the #1 exporter of coffee in the world. And coffee makes up a decent chunk of Brazil's whole economy. It would take around 100 cups of coffee for a lethal dose of caffeine. Unimaginable. We get the jitters after just 2 or 3 cups. So what would cup 90 feel like? Would we be able to fly and fight crime? Probably not. And we definitely don't recommend trying it out. Most cases of coffee overdose don't come from conventional coffee drinking, but from more, creative ways of consuming coffee, such as coffee enemas. Having that much caffeine in your system could lead to a heart attack or seizure. There are 2 kinds of beans. The 2 kinds of beans are Arabica and Robusta. They have different tastes and different caffeine content. Arabica beans are more popular around the world. In fact, 70% of coffee drank on Earth is Arabica. Robusta beans are grown in different climates and are found largely in Africa and Indonesia. Although most people prefer the taste of Arabica, Robusta has its fans, and Robusta beans have twice as much caffeine as Arabica. The drink Americano comes from when American GIs in World War II would order their espresso with water because it was too strong. Sort of funny when you think about how tough soldiers are supposed to be. Asking your host to water down their coffee because it's too strong for you definitely isn't the most rugged of requests. When preparing an Americano, you always pour the hot water on top of the espresso in the glass. If you are instead pouring espresso over hot water, you're making a different drink, commonly referred to as a long black. New York drinks about 7 times as much coffee as the rest of the world. Well, they do call it the city that never sleeps. Maybe this is why? You know, New Yorkers, we've heard it helps if you don't drink any coffee after sunset. Just a tip. There's some speculation to why the Big Apple drinks so much coffee. A lot of it might have to do with population density. Since it is such a packed city, there are literally coffee shops everywhere. It also doesn't hurt that coffee is such a large part of the American culture. U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt drank a ton of coffee. Seriously, this is not an exaggeration. Teddy was known to drink a gallon of coffee a day. No wonder he was able to get so much done in the wake of the American Civil War. Good old Teddy also helped Maxwell House come up with their famous slogan, "Good till the last drop." He actually came up with that slogan while drinking coffee in Andrew Jackson's living room. Legend has it that coffee was discovered by Ethiopian shepherds, who discovered their goats dancing around after eating the beans. How exactly does a goat dance? In any case, we're forever grateful for the contribution of these anonymous, possibly fictional 9th century goat herders. Without them, restless New Yorkers would have no way to wake up in the morning. Bless you, dancing goats, for giving us a discovery that's literally better than any other discovery in the history of the world. Every day when you drink your daily cup or 5 of coffee, make sure to get on your knees and thank the goat gods that brought us coffee. Prolific French writer and philosopher Voltaire was said to drink 50 cups of coffee per day. François-Marie Arouet, a.k.a. Voltaire, was certainly an eccentric and energetic figure, so he must have gotten his energy from somewhere, right? Still, this one seems a little fishy. We can only assume 50 cups was a smaller serving size then, because this probably would have made for some digestive problems, no? 50 cups is actually half of the lethal dose, so Voltaire must have been living on the edge. It's also likely that the coffee Voltaire drank was not as strong and concentrated as what we sip on today. So although 50 cups sounds like a lot, it may have been 50 cups of watered-down Joe. Chapter 4, Smuggling 101. The trick is to secret your stash in materials that have a slow permeation rate, without contaminating the outside of the packaging. You must then hurry and transport your stash before the pot odors have time to permeate and develop a scent cone on the outside of the packaging. And the listener can think of dozens of ways to fool a drug dog, after understanding how a drug dog works. Canines cannot smell through material. Odors permeate out and create a scent cone that the dog detects. Almost everything has pores for odors to permeate. Even plastic baggies have tiny microscopic pores. To prove this to yourself, place tuna inside a plastic baggie and sniff the outside of the bag. You'll notice you cannot smell the fish. Wait a few hours and you'll notice you can smell the permeated fish on the outside of the baggie. Lead is a heavy metal and non-porous. But if you hide your stash in a lead box, the canine handler will become suspicious. Temperatures affect permeation. Colder temperatures slow permeation, so freezing your stash in a block of ice slows the permeation to almost nothing. But blocks of ice could make a smart canine handler suspicious. The trick is to secret your stash in materials that have a slow permeation rate without contaminating the outside of the package. You must then hurry and transport your stash before the pot odors have time to permeate and develop a scent cone on the outside of the packaging. Weed, pot, marijuana. Here's the first way. Put it in a freezer bag. Ziploc Stay Fresh works best. Push all the air possible out of your freezer bag and seal it. Put the air-free Ziploc bag into a vacuum seal bag and open the plastic Ziploc about an inch, just not much. After opening the Ziploc seal, close up the vacuum bag and vacuum out the air from the bag. It may start to hesitate towards the end, but it's just not done yet. Trust me. Make as airtight as possible. Place that vacuum bag into another vacuum bag and seal it, vacuuming out the air again. Take another vacuum bag and put fresh ground coffee beans in it. Place the drugs into the ground up beans. Be sure the coffee beans cover the whole amount of the inside vacuum bag to avoid detection. After that, just vacuum the coffee bag, and it should look as though you have a bag of vacuum-sealed coffee grounds. Done. Now invisible from canine units. But now you need to hide it well enough from an officer. Foil, glass, oils, and cold temperatures are all good to use. But remember, trying to mask odors does not work. Canines smell like humans see. When presented with a bowl of stew, humans see all the ingredients, but only smell one odor: stew. Dogs can separate odors with their supernatural snouts. When a canine sniffs the same bowl, she smells onions, pepper, tomatoes, beef, beans, etc. So if you place your herb in a plastic baggie, spray it with perfume. Then seal it in plastic tubing and drop it in your auto's fuel tank. A scent cone will develop on the outside of the fuel tank. The canine will enter this scent cone and smell the plastic baggie, the gasoline, the perfume, the plastic tubing, and the marijuana. This explains how my canine detected hundreds of pounds of marijuana hidden in gasoline tanks. Canines are trained to detect marijuana, cocaine, methamphetamine, and heroin. They are not trained to detect mushrooms or LSD. I hope this information keeps you out of a human cage, which is far worse than the cages cops keep their dogs in. This information was gathered from variated sources. He rubs his glasses clean. How does that make you feel?